Happy middle of the week, writers. Whether it be Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, some day that is not Friday. I'm a little under the weather this week, so I apologize if I sound nasally, stuffy, have very bad allergies. But I'm going to rough it out because we got stuff to talk about, or I got stuff to talk about, and you got stuff to listen to if you want to listen to it. So I want to change things up a little bit with today's topic. I've been thinking about this a lot since uh, not just being involved in the podcast, but also joining a lot of writers groups, being more involved in those discussions, and don't mind that clacking around. That's one of my dogs. Um, and looking at a lot more of the work that's out there by indie authors. So I'm going to talk a bit about self-publishing, but not too much because I don't want to speak on something that I'm not an expert on. So I'm just going to share some of my limited knowledge and my opinions on that. But mainly from the perspective of why I haven't done it. So full disclosure, I have been writing for over 20 years now, but I am not a published author. Now, some of you may say, all right, if you're not published, then, I don't really want to listen to your advice. And you know what? That's okay. If you only want to listen to the advice and opinions of published authors, that is definitely your prerogative. Feel free to go check out one of the many podcasts or books or documentaries or even classes in some cases from one of those authors. Want to be clear about that. However, I do think that experience is important, and as I said, I've been writing for over 20 years, and I have taught other writers. I have taught a creative writing workshop to teens and adults. So that is the place I'm speaking from. So why am I not published when I've been writing for that long? There's a couple reasons. One of the reasons is that even though I started writing really young, that doesn't mean you want to start publishing young. Part of the issue with publishing young is that you then look back on that work later and you're like, oh my God, what was I thinking? Um, so that's one reason. Another reason is that the first like real book that I tackled, I started at 13 and I didn't truly finish it until a couple years ago. It was a labor of love and hate equally. Something that I kept finishing a draft and then being like, it's not good enough. And I'd put it away for a while and work on stuff and go back and say, all right, let's try this again. And it's not good enough. Um, Obviously, I don't recommend that you take like over 15 years to finish a work. That's not uh, really the norm. However, it does happen sometimes. If it's a work that you're really passionate about and you just haven't gotten there yet, then sometimes you do end up going back and forth on it for many years. And I should specify that it's not like 15 straight years of work, it's 15 on and off years of work. So that's one reason why I haven't published. The other reason is that even upon finishing this work, um, I'm very conflicted about what I want to do with it. It's obviously a passion project since I put that much time and effort into it. But the avenues out there, I'm not really a big fan of any of them, and I'll explain why. So there's traditional publishing. This is an option that I was a much bigger fan of when I was younger. You would go to your local library and you'd see things like Penguin House and oh, what's another good one? See, I always blank when I'm trying to come up with examples. Random House Publishers and where's some of the kids ones? Well, you get the idea. Harlequin, not that one. But you would see all these, you'd see patterns, right? You would see patterns in the kinds of publishers that you would find at your local library, at Barnes and Nobles. And you would think, man, that's who I want to go through, right? That's the kind of brand I want stamped on my book, because that's like a stamp of approval. It still is, but traditional publishing, although I think it's always been pretty difficult to break into, it's become more and more difficult. And I don't really like that it seems that traditional publishing just kind of goes with the trends. And when I look at work that has been sometimes wildly successful within the traditional publishing sphere, and this is probably going to get me a lot of hate here, but like Stephanie Meyer's Twilight, that makes me question it. That makes me question the validity of the vetting processes that they do in traditional publishing, the validity of the editors that they have on staff at these traditional publishers, and whether it's just not like a big popularity contest. Because that's kind of how it feels, right? It feels like going through high school again, where pretty much everything was just about what's the most popular, what haircut is popular, what makeup is popular, what clothing is popular, what sports team is popular, it's just all a popularity contest, and I'm not for that. I don't like that. I don't want to have my writing dictated by the whims of the masses, I guess you can say. Not that those whims are always bad. Sometimes we have some trends that I do appreciate as a writer, but I don't want it dictated by that. So popularity contest is one thing about it. Another thing, which I spoke about a little bit there, is how difficult it is to break into it. And I think it just gets more and more difficult as we go. And you would kind of think that since we're in this digital age and there's like other ways of sharing your work now, that maybe traditional publishing would open up a little bit to try to make that more accessible, but I don't really see that happening. And when you're working a full-time job and you've got responsibilities and either kids or pets or whatever the case, not spending the time on all those query letters and sending out the manuscripts and just kind of falling all over yourself for those traditional publishing houses, on top of just trying to write your work and write it good, it is quite an investment. So there are some reasons that I'm not really into the traditional publishing anymore. I'll add one more. I'm getting a little ranty here, but one more. The other one is lack of control. Lack of creative control, I should say. If you sign up with a traditional publisher, then you may be forced into changing things that you as a writer feel married to. That could be the cover art, that could be certain plot points, and it could be small things too, maybe things that don't matter as much. But I very much care about having creative control over my work, so that doesn't really sit well with me. I understand why they do it, but it doesn't sit well with me. So that's traditional publishing. All right, so there's obviously other options out there. So self-publishing. I said I was going to talk about, self-publishing. That one, that's a tough one, right? Because it's been around for a long time, but it has also had a stigma attached to it for a long time. And you would think, again, being in that digital age for as long as we have, the stigma would start to kind of pull back, not be as big of a deal, but it's still there. It is deeply embedded. I'm not sure if I'm going to be around by the time that stigma goes away, if I'm being honest. I'm sure it's gotten a little bit better, but it's still pretty bad. And I hate to say it, but there are some writers, or I guess I should say some authors, published, self published authors, who are unfortunately perpetuating the stigma of self publishing. What do I mean by that? I mean taking your work, not doing your due diligence with it before it gets published, and then putting something out there for people to buy, to spend money on, that is just littered with errors. I see it again and again and again. It's very disheartening because there are authors out there that are truly talented and put in the time and the effort to make their work as good as they could with the resources they had available before putting it out there. Now, I realize that some self published authors struggle with things like grammar, punctuation, spelling. I get that. A lot of people struggle with that, but that's what friends and family are for, or beta readers. If you don't have friends and family that are willing to read, then you can try to get some beta readers to help with that. If you know someone that is good at editing, try to bring them on board. If you don't, maybe you need to cough up a bit of money for an editor. I know that's not fun, but it really is a very, very, very important part of the process to have the work edited before you publish it. Self-publishing is not supposed to be like the short way to getting it out there. You're still supposed to do the steps until you get published if you're doing self-publishing. And I just unfortunately see this happen a lot. I also realize that some self-published authors are writing in English, but they are English second language. That's another situation where you need to get some help before you put the book out as a product. Because remember, when your book is published and out there for consumption, it has become a product. You're asking people for money for it. And people would really like to have good quality things when they're putting money towards something. And I don't blame them. I like that too. So that's a big part of the stigma, is quality control, the lack thereof, right? Because there is no publishing company behind it to say, whoa, hold on, look at all the errors we got here. We got to fix these first. Obviously, errors still come out in traditionally published books too, but they tend to be much fewer and far between. So that's one reason I don't not really keen on the self-publishing route, because it does have that stigma attached, and there are a lot of good authors that are hurting because of that, because of the lack of quality control in that field. Another reason I don't like it is it's very, very time consuming, not from the perspective of actually getting it published. My understanding from speaking to others is that doesn't seem too bad. But because when you're self-publishing, you're also your own salesman and marketer. You don't have, a traditional publishing firm taking care of all that for you. So it's not just about writing the work and then getting it into the right format, choosing a cover and stuff like that. It's also about putting the work out there, trying to get it into bookstores or libraries, trying to get book signings, trying to get events, trying to get people to buy it. That's a lot of work. That in and of itself is a full-time job. And I already have a full-time job. So, and most writers do. So I don't know that I have the time to put into something like that, and that I ever will. Maybe when I retire. So that's another thing that I don't really like about the self-publishing route. So traditional publishing, self-publishing, what else can you do? Well, those are the publishing routes. I guess there are, kind of indie publishers, from the sense of like if you get into Wattpad or something and you get headhunted on there, there are some routes like that. And there are vanity publishers, but I wouldn't recommend that route, because if you're going to vanity publish, you might as well have just self-published. It's going to cost you more money to go through the vanity publisher, most likely, and you're still going to be responsible for all your own marketing, so why even bother? Um, so those are your publishing options, but what about just sharing your work? So I feel like as a writer, it's important to be writing because you love to write, not because you want to make money, because uh, chances are you're not going to make money from it. So, what about just sharing your work because you're passionate about the work, and you want people to feel some way about it? So, there are plenty of places to do that, right? There's Wattpad and Inkit and Campfire, all these places that are specifically set up for writers to commune and give feedback and support to each other. You can set up your own blog. I have a blog, and this is something that I've been considering, releasing it in chapter format on the blog. You could even do your own audiobook if you want to. You could do something fancy if you want to put the time and money into it, or you could just do it, again, by chapter or by section on a YouTube channel. So there are ways to get your work out there and share it if you're really passionate about it without publishing it. Um, yeah, you're not going to make money that way. And, maybe you're cutting yourself off from publishing options in the future, because who's going to want to publish something that's already out there for free? But if you don't really care so much about being able to say, I'm a published author, or having the potential to make the money from it, then I think that just sharing it on a blog, as an audiobook, on some of the writing communities out there, I think that's perfectly fine. And I have been seriously considering one of those options for a couple years now. I haven't come to a final conclusion, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to go with one of those, because I'm not really concerned about the money. I just want to share this labor of love hate project that I worked on for almost half of my current life so far. Those are my thoughts on it. Probably a little controversial. Might have lost you when I mentioned Twilight, because I obviously wasn't mentioning it in a positive light. It's fine if that happened. So what are your thoughts? Are you a published author? Did you get traditionally published? Did you do self-published? Have you been kind of struggling with the same thing, whether you actually publish or you just want to share it for fun? If you have just shared it for fun, what avenue did you decide to take? Leave it in the comments below, or you can always hit me up on Facebook. I have an author page on there, Elizabeth Boss, and the podcast itself also has a page on there, Fantastic Books and How to Write Them. Hope to see you there. Thanks for joining me.